With that, I wanted to say thank you. Remind everybody that there are some light refreshments and drinks in the back. Please feel free to get up and serve yourself as we go. And I'd like to turn the podium over to Ron Fleming, the chairman of Scenic America. Thank you so much.
Well, it's a real pleasure for us to be here and to have the discipline of this sort of a meeting, which is really focused around the economics of aesthetics, looking at how we measure things. And we can do that better now than we could 20 years ago, because there's been a huge growth in the number of design review and historic districts, and we can see the increase in the property values. We can see the increase in the tourism in areas that have had a special designation over the last couple of decades. And so our movement is maturing, and it's important that we think about the numbers. I was in Athens, Georgia on Sunday, and at a reception, and the head of the Historic District Commission came up to me and she said, well, we still have skeptics on the city council, and they always want to know what the economic benefits are. So I think our mission today is to try to look at that data, and the discipline is to be rigorous about it, and a lot of this is going to be documented so that we hope we can use it in the future. We wouldn't have been able to do this without Margaret Lloyd, who's vice chairman and who lives in Galveston and has been a strong force on the Scenic America board. And she really, it's her energy that managed to get us to Ann Culver and her staff, who were outside in the hall, or were a minute ago. And without that incredible dedication, we wouldn't be able to do this kind of a conference. And I think it's good for the organization to move around the country and to have different scenics organizing and sponsoring it. Last year we were in San Francisco. The head of Scenic San Francisco is here today. Where's he? Right there, Milo. So he gave us an inspiration, and I hope we'll continue to do that, have a meeting in Washington and a meeting in some other part of the country, so that we kind of increase our strength in our organization. I had a dream last night. It wasn't Martin Luther King's dream. I was in my jogging clothes, and I was trying to get back to my room in order to be here in time. And I could never get it turned into a department store, and I couldn't get out of home furnishings. I finally woke up with a great start, and I realized I had an extra hour, thank goodness, because of the time change. So here we are. I want to also thank the people who are working outside, and I hope they've come in to hear some of the words, but Ashley Shelley and Anna Marie Sabrida of the Scenic Houston staff have been a very important part of this meeting. And of course, we wouldn't be able to handle it also without Mary Tracy, who is our president, and Max Ashburn, who's our communications director, and who never sleeps. I know, I called him up this morning after I got out of my dream. And you can see on the wall here some of the organizations that have supported this meeting. That's important, and you'll see them all day long. So I'm going to start off with just a few images. This shows you the growth of the affiliates. So the rise of the Scenics is what we're calling this. They're increasing even since 2010. And that has a lot to do, I think, with the communications strategies, the way that we now are able to use technology. And that has a lot to do with Max Ashburn. Do I point it? Where do I point it? We know it works because it's worked once. When I drop this thing at the battery, well, the battery's still in it. Maybe that's going to make a difference. Here we go. So here we are. These are the states that we know of. There have been also some drop-in business today, so I think we're probably up into the 90s. And of course, we have the legacy of Lady Bird and the evaluation of what's happened in the last 50 years since the White House conference. what was that, 1965? Is that right? So we're thinking about, well, where should we go after 50 years, and how can the accumulated evidence that we pull together today be part of our strategy for thinking about evaluation? And of course, we've seen what's happened in Houston, dramatic change from 15,000 billboards several decades ago to 1,500 today. Not so much because of zoning, but because of lots of other things. I think Houston is a very interesting case. There's an enormous amount of pride and can-do attitude, and so as a result of that energy and the development of the city, dynamic development of the city, there has been a reduction of billboards and an enhancement of parkways, and you heard about some of the other projects that are going forward. There are still threats along the way, like turning every bus into a billboard. And you can see the difference between the gateways, and there's still work to be done, particularly on that road to the airport. That's the proverbial road to the airport, or all over America, actually. It's pretty much the same. There have been very few communities that have been able to stop the detritus of the strip. I can think of one beautiful place, Cooperstown, New York, that doesn't have a strip. Now, it's my honor to introduce a former chairman of Scenic America, as well as a founder of Scenic Houston and Scenic Texas, a lawyer, a Yale graduate, and a man who's cared passionately about the visual environment and about planting of trees. I think he was also involved in the Tree Commission, and he's a man who is going to get an award, and we'd like to have him give us, at the beginning of the day, a kind of perspective on Houston, where it's come, where it's going. Carroll.
I don't need to push anything on here, right?
No.
Good. Okay, well, I'll turn this down so I can
All right.
put that down. Thank you very much, Ron, for the kind introduction. And I have to say, when I started in all these activities around 1967, I was just at that time starting at my law firm, Locke Lord, where I practiced law for 44 years until I finally decided I was never going to perfect it. So I gave up practicing last year. And when I started out, it was kind of something that I didn't go around talking about. I was not sure how the establishment would feel about this. But in fact, over the years, Locke Lord has been such a strong force for all the things that I've worked on all these years. And I want to thank the law firm and Don Glendenning and all the others for all the support that they gave to me. It was possible for me to pursue a law career, practicing law, while spending basically a whole nother life on this sort of thing. That's a comment a lot of you will understand from your own personal perspectives. Mayor Anise Parker is away this morning. She was called out of town, and so on behalf of her and the city of Houston, I would like to welcome to Houston. I would first like to say a few words about Mayor Parker that she would not say about herself. She has been a staunch champion of scenic values since she was first elected to city council in 1988. Right away, issues arose concerning strict regulations applicable to cultural and entertainment venues and events in the downtown theater district. Especially troubling was a proposed relaxation of prohibitions against moving messages and what are called spectacular signs in the district. Also, local government entities at the time were exempt from the city sign code, which is common in many cities, as well as the county and other public entities. And at the Astrodome, the county was in the process of constructing signs that were essentially 672 square foot billboards promoting sports and other events. Mayor Parker had just been elected to the council, and she came forward to become an active leader of the council members who were troubled by the proposals. The result was a compromise which in fact represented an important step forward in strengthening the effectiveness of sign control in Houston. Specifically, the relaxation of the standards applicable to the theater district were modest, and more significantly, the sign ordinance was amended to remove the governmental exemption entirely, so that henceforth the city, county, and all other governmental entities became and today are fully subject to all of the provisions of the sign code. I don't know what your experience is in other cities, but that may still be very common. This is one example of something that happens, and that is when there's a threatened dilution of a sign code, often the result can be its strengthening. And it demonstrates the importance of having scenic advocates like Mayor Parker busy at City Hall. Not having billboards or having very few is just one of the many facets that make a city scenic or even beautiful. Some of these are provided by nature, such as mountains, hills, seashores, lakes, forests. However, the built environment provides another equally determinative aspect of what makes a city scenic or beautiful. No one would suggest that Houston in 1964 was a scenic, much less a beautiful city. Today, however, visitors say that Houston makes a different impression, especially over the last 35 years, some would say. Houston has been in the process of becoming a scenic city and has come firmly to believe that beautification powers and supports growth and prosperity. Now, there's 6 areas that I'm going to discuss this morning: billboards, off-premise signs, business on-premise signs and attention-getting devices, trees and landscaping, context-sensitive highway design, parks and open spaces, and streetscapes. Now, there are a couple of topics that I'm not going to discuss because we've had only limited, if any, success here. One being undergrounding utility, and the other being land use controls, on which there are a variety of opinions in the scenic community in Houston. As you know, Houston has no zoning. Let's start with billboards, which is what got us started in Houston, and happily we've expanded from billboards to many, many other topics. Houston is a large city by population and area, so that its sign ordinances apply not just within the city limits, but also within what is called its extraterritorial jurisdiction, called the ETJ, which I'll mention at various points. Houston's ETJ has over 3,000 square miles and over 5 million population. Today, Houston and its ETJ have just 1,500 billboards, where there were once more than 10,000. Sometimes the estimate of 15,000 is given. It certainly seemed like at least 15,000 at the time if you came to Houston. Most of what remains today, ironically, are billboards that are protected by federal law. The Highway Beautification Act of 1964, which says that billboards cannot be taken down without paying just compensation, which is often interpreted to mean something quite, I think, ridiculously high. When and if this provision is ever repealed, which someday maybe our children or grandchildren will accomplish, for all of us, in Houston, all of those signs will immediately have to be taken down, because they're, as far as city law is concerned, in Texas law, they're totally amortized. They're just waiting for the Federal Beautification Act to be repealed, and they have to come down immediately. Not surprisingly, billboards have been the hottest scenic topic in Houston for decades and remain in the forefront of thinking, and probably, hopefully, always will. Why do I say hopefully? It pains Houstonians to become aware of jurisdictions around the country where old billboard prohibitions, or even hard-fought new ones, have gone by the wayside. As many of you know too well, the industry is just like the ocean at the seashore. It never stops pounding on the door, never gives up. Against an army of lobbyists, success requires that organizations like Scenic Houston, Scenic America, and other similar scenic organizations across the country continue always to work to protect what the hard work of many has accomplished. The enforcement of the modest sign code in Houston before World War II was essentially given up after World War II, the World War II years, post-war years, and billboard locations and sizes became essentially unregulated. Coupled with the total absence of zoning, Houston came to have the distinction of being called the billboard capital of the world. Ads for billboards companies proclaimed that in Houston, you could build a billboard in your own front yard, and there were cartoons around that would show such a thing with a homeowner standing in front, exulting about all the income he was receiving. Opposition finally arrived when the AIA held its national convention in 1964, which was just before the Federal Highway Beautification Act was passed at the urging of Lady Bird Johnson, our first Texas scenic hero. Local president, AIA president Ralph Anderson, who's now deceased, included in the traditional local charrette a proposal that Houston pass a billboard code, one of modest proportions, and a group of Houston leaders took on the project. They didn't think it would be particularly difficult. The industry turned out to pack City Hall with the hall there, and when the proposal was first introduced, and the Billboards organization found out, Billboards Limited organization found out that not one city council member, excuse me? Is that better? Okay. A group of leaders took on the project, but they immediately found that they were getting nowhere, that not even one councilman would introduce an ordinance. One did show up sort of at night on the telephone and say, if there's ever a second person, I'll introduce something. And that began 15 years of wandering in the desert. For 15 years, Billboards Limited, and I wonder who is here who was involved in those early years. Alan? Good. Ray, I see some people back there. That's great. We were really in the desert, and we were very, very frustrated. A few minor ordinances were passed, but the momentum continued to grow. In 1990, some billboard companies consented to the creation of 6 scenic districts along the bayous flowing through the city, where further billboard construction was prohibited and strict on-premise sign restrictions imposed. Finally, in 1979, an opportunity to take action presented itself. The City Council awarded a franchise to a company to build bus shelters at no cost to the city, on which commercial advertising would be placed. This was little noticed by the public, but Billboards Limited members collected more than the 1,000 required voters which were required to subject the franchise to the voters of the city. The franchise was rejected 56% to 44%. Against that backdrop, today there is no advertising on any metro facilities in Houston, neither trains nor train stations, buses nor bus shelters nor anything else. There have been many skirmishes along the way when this has had to been fought again, but it has persisted to this day. Also, Metro has voluntarily taken down all the billboards, over 125 in one case, on rights of way which they purchased to build lines, usually along roadways where the billboards had been built. Months later in 1980, the worm turned in a big way. City Council was expanded to 14 members, some from districts and some at large. The first women were elected, including the late scenic heroine Eleanor Tinsley, always superbly supported by her stellar head of staff, Madeline Appel, former Scenic America chair, who is just now retired as head of staff for Mayor Parker, as well as a host of new council members. Almost immediately, council passed a far-reaching billboard law which prohibited the construction of any new billboards, required the removal by 6-year amortization of a number of billboards in the city, required all tall signs to be reduced in height, and generally fulfilled the wish list of any scenic advocate. The idea of prohibiting billboard construction, the key provision, and I think the key provision to this is the starting place, stopping, prohibiting billboard construction, I think, for any signed ordinance. When you're taking down billboards while billboards are putting up, you're just getting into a game, I think, that you're very, very unlikely to win in the long run. This idea of prohibiting billboard construction spread in Texas like wildfire. Today, out of 1,200 Texas cities, over 300 prohibit any new construction. That's including more or less all of the major cities of the state. And a billboard construction provision is considered the linchpin of any Texas city sign ordinance. Also, currently, only 50 of the 1,200 cities allow digital billboards, something about which you probably all know a lot. The industry began immediately working in the Texas legislature to overcome the Houston ordinance. While polling throughout America always shows, and found here as well, that 80% of voters at all levels of government favor billboard controls of a strong nature, the higher government you go to, it seems that the citizen input becomes less important, with the result that we've all seen that when you win at the city level, then it goes to the state level. If you lose at the state level, it goes to the federal level, each of which is more difficult for us to achieve what we want to achieve. So the billboard industry immediately went to the Texas legislature to try and overcome this ordinance, and did so in the first session that occurred. But Governor Mark White, at the behest of some friends who happened to be at the governor's mansion for dinner just the day after it happened, he vetoed the bill, and so we were saved for a couple of years. Then, in the next session, the legislature came into being, into its session every 2 years in Texas, and now the organization Scenic Texas arrived in Austin with Scenic Houston members, but also Scenic San Antonio, Scenic Fort Worth, Scenic San Antonio, Scenic Austin, ultimately Scenic Dallas, and Scenic Texas members from other cities and areas. A statewide movement was now at work. Of huge significance was the change of heart of the Board of the Houston Chamber of Commerce, now known as the Greater Houston Partnership, which, due to the efforts of a Houston civic leader named I.S. Brockstein and others, when a committee recommendation came to the board of the chamber to do something about overturning the Houston ordinance, the members unanimously, whom he had lobbied in advance, voted instead to support upholding the ordinance. And that's been a very, very important thing, that our Greater Houston Partnership, or the Chamber of Commerce basically, has been a strong, staunch advocate of sign control for all these years. That has just really made all the difference. The result in 1985 was a forced compromise called House Bill 1330, under which the power to have amortization ordinances was retained by some 19 cities actually, in the state which already had it, and there were a couple of months when you could become one of those cities, which a couple of cities did, and continued the power not only for the amortizations they had done, but to amortize in the future as well. All of other Texas cities who were not there to represent themselves were prohibited from amortizing in the future. So that's our bifurcated system in Houston. However, they did, the Houston amortization period of 6 years seemed too short. So they required the cities to reset those in committees which had billboard industry representatives. And as a result of that, in Houston, the period ended up to be 23 years. And Ralph Anderson was very instrumental in doing this, and actually let it be extended, because this would be something that actually could be done and would be politically feasible. And the result of that, of course, is 23 years have now passed, and all Houston billboards are amortized. Only thing you see are things protected by the federal law. So something else happened at that time, though. Until that time, the Houston Billboard Ordinance only applied within the city, but almost unnoticed in this legislation, a provision was put in that extended the authority of the city of Houston to extend its billboard law into its some 3,000 square mile ETJ. Now, that was, if we were groaning about, what happened at this session, that I think is just so key and so important. Because the ETJs are the places where really billboard construction occurs these days, the ex-urban areas. So ex-urban areas in Houston have been protected for all this time, and I think that has been of critical importance to what has taken place. And it's a second example how in the midst of a threatened dilution of a sign ordinance, sometimes you come out sort of like laughing or smiling, but you don't let anybody see that. Still, Houston smarted from the dilution of its power to take down billboards. The 1980 ordinance had chosen to remove only a very limited number of Houston's many thousands of billboards, sparing the majority of them. And the legislative response had been to do all of these things to curtail the 1980 ordinance. The result of showing restraint had not been rewarded. The City of Houston response in 1990 was to extend amortization of all billboards Houston billboards, with the intended result that Houston and its large ETJ would eventually have no billboards at all, provided with respect, of course, to the ones on federal highways, which would require change in federal law. Finally, against this backdrop, a series of negotiations have taken place with the companies, which have led to many, many takedowns, with many, many more to occur. Under applicable Texas rules adopted in 2008, digital billboards cannot be located within a city or its ETJ unless the city consents. The Houston City Council acted immediately and unanimously to prohibit digital billboards in Houston and its ETJ. You do see some digital signs that are on-premise signs. That's a different topic. So today, the Houston Standard Metropolitan Statistical Area has some 800 miles of freeways, perhaps a majority of which have been built since the ban on construction. The old billboards, due to federal law, remain cluttered, but the new roadways are often quite beautiful, especially those that have enjoyed mandated forestation, landscaping, and context-sensitive design. Truly a tale of two cities. It is this story of citizen activity for over a half a century and the coming of new generations of public officials such as Mayor Parker, which led to the presentation last year to the City of Houston of Scenic America's first Clear Vision Award. Houston is no longer the billboard capital of the world, and with proper diligence, it will never become that again. Second topic is on-premise signs and attention-getting devices. As you might expect from this narrative, until relatively recent times, Houston on-premise sign laws governed only engineering and safety matters. I remember being in a negotiation in which the industry was saying there could be no height limits, and I proposed a 125-foot height limit. And they would not accept that. It was no height limit, so that's sort of where we started. The topic finally began to surface in forums such as the Greater Houston Partnership, our Chamber of Commerce, and initially, many small companies stiffly resisted any aesthetic limitations at all. However, a more mature local on-premise sign industry developed, which became willing to negotiate and do reasonable things. And so I think our experience has been that the on-premise sign industry you can do business with. The maximization of realizing their prospects from building signs do not require signs that are aesthetically too large and so forth. And they also are looking to preserve their position in community opinion in the long run. And so you can do business with them. And since its founding in 1980, the new player on the scene, Scenic Houston, has taken an active role in helping shape on-premise sign policy in Houston. In the absence of zoning, sign regulations came to be divided into 4 types of rights-of-way, being freeways, thoroughfares, scenic districts, and residential streets, each having its own set of height and size restrictions. In general, the least restrictive has a height limit of 42 feet, the next level 25, and then the local or scenic districts 12 feet. Interestingly, any roadway or area in the city or its ETJ can be designated a scenic district. So what has happened is that large areas of the city have now been declared scenic districts, and therefore the strictest on-premise sign laws that are available under this, which I think are as strict as you would probably find in any certainly large city, become applicable in the whole area. I don't know what the percentage of Houston that is now in a scenic district, but it's a very popular thing for areas to do, led typically by the business communities. And I think maybe that's a point that needs to be made, and that is that the sign companies, the business community, quality is associated with limited signage. And so these are friends in what we're doing in the on-premise area, I think. I think I'm running a little short on time, so I'll try to skip through this a little bit. Downtown, as a result of negotiations between scenic advocates and sign companies, around 1990, a prohibition was placed on having signs on the faces of the buildings downtown more than 42 feet off the ground. And that has resulted to kind of the iconic views of downtown Houston, which now take place, where the signs on top of the buildings are all gone, except for one or two that have failed to do so. New buildings have been built, no signs on the buildings. Old buildings have been renovated, they take the signs off. It's just not a modern way to look. And finally, there are a few left, but they're hardly noticeable. And that, for example, combined with the beautiful parkway coming into Houston, results in a beautiful downtown skyline, which is often commented about. One foreign filmmaker exulted publicly here about the clean look, he called it, of the downtown skyline when viewed from the greenery surrounding the approach along Allen Parkway. This scene pops up over and over again as being the typical picture of Houston, and the legally mandated absence of signage on downtown buildings is a vital feature. Sadly, that doesn't apply in the rest of the city, and something that is very much of concern to me is that our suburban high-rise buildings are the new billboards of Houston. And they're not actually, it's not because a company has a 30-story building and puts its sign up there, but rather this is now a business, I don't know whose business it is, so that you go in and rent a closet in a room, which makes you on premise, and then your sign is emblazoned on the top on panels that actually contain the names of 3 companies. And so that is, as I say, to me, at night, I think this is something that we should hopefully do something about. Attention-getting devices I can dismiss quickly. Houston recently banned all attention-getting devices in the city and the ETJ, and they are all gone. What a relief. I would say, though, that it does seem to prompt outbursts of patriotism. So the result of that is that American flags, you would think coming to Houston, this is the most patriotic, super Texas place in the world, but it's not that. It's people putting up huge signs because they can't put up any kind of business signs. After World War II, the ambitious and successful efforts of earlier years to plant street trees, rows of trees and esplanades, and add park spaces and green spaces to Houston were largely abandoned. People then, after the war, thought of their yards as the place where they would enjoy greenery, and as the suburbs sprawled across the coastal plain, there were hardly any barriers, natural barriers to development. So road builders were tasked with building as many miles of needed roads as possible. These developmental needs dwarfed aesthetic considerations as people tended to find their needs for greenery in their yards, as I said. In 1975, a group of downtown lawyers started organizing tree projects in the Rice University area and then around other central areas of Houston. Ultimately, the group organized as Trees for Houston hired staff and now has a forestation program called Freeways into Treeways and has its own tree farms. Since 1983, this organization, Trees for Houston, has planted more than 475,000 trees here, still with an emphasis on planting rows of street trees, which is something you would have thought in 1965 was a long forgotten area. But if you drive around Houston, there are street trees everywhere. That is not the city of Houston. Let me say that is all done through private effort, primarily through this organization. And I have to mention the name Bill Coates as kind of our green thumb here. Bill passed away a couple of years ago and is so much responsible for all that was done in that respect. Also, parks. After World War II, parks were hard. We had nice parks from the past. When the medical center was started here, the city council actually voted to give half of Herman Park to the medical center for its expansion. Only when the heirs of the family that had given the property in the first place, the Herman family, objected, was it discovered that ownership would revert to the family. So that was kind of the low point of park development in Houston. But since then, organizations such as the Park People, the Herman Park Conservancy, which was started by Bill Coates, have spent, so it resulted in investments of tens of millions of dollars in parks, something quite different from what we had seen before. Scenic Houston has played a vital role in the greening of Houston's many freeways, perhaps uniquely joined by the business community, such as the Chamber of Commerce and the Quality of Life Coalition. thanks to enlightened TxDOT engineers in Houston and to legislators, a percentage of highway funding was earmarked for landscaping, primarily forestation along state freeways and roads. Moreover, even a congressional earmark procured about $20 million for trees along highways in Houston. Highway design. In 2001, we got passed with little fanfare something called the Scenic Act. The engineers at TxDOT used to say, you know, we love trees, we love to see beautiful roadways, but we have a certain amount of money, and our legislative mandate is to see how many miles of roads we can build with that money. And so, you know, we don't have any problem with you. That seemed sort of like an excuse at the time, but nonetheless, we went in 2001, and again, I don't know that this was noticed, or I don't remember it being noticed at all because it was something very non-controversial. We put some language in which legislative authorization and direction was given, pointing to a new way of designing Texas roadways called context-sensitive design. So as the engineers had said to us, we just build roadways, as I mentioned, trying to get as many miles as possible. To our rather amazement, and true in some areas more than others, especially large urban areas like Houston, as soon as this law was passed, they named context-sensitive design and landscaping district heads in all the districts. And in Houston in particular, we found that we had people there who were hugely sympathetic. And the result is highways in Houston, and as a result of the fact this was done through state legislation, our roadways, our freeways all over the state are remarkably nice. They're landscaped. They have all kinds of design elements. And in fact, by creating these beautiful kinds of roadways, it's sort of becoming irrelevant on these roadways what kinds of buildings or signs or whatever there are along the roadways, because they're now becoming self-contained, landscaped roadways. I mean, I'm familiar with those all over the country, but that is what is done with all Texas roadways now. Parks and green spaces. After years without much progress, park acreage in the city has increased significantly. Perhaps the most important development taking place now is an initiative to create continuous and accessible parks and trails along the major bayous within the city, such as Buffalo Bayou in the downtown area. This initiative will create 1,500 acres of new parkland and 80 miles of new trails. Discovery Park, which is quite near here, is an entirely new downtown park built within 10 years with very large public and private funding. This sort of thing would never have happened in Houston decades ago. Streetscapes. The controversial lack of zoning and limited role of planning in Houston and the limited powers of county government in Texas have had many effects. Some civic functions that in most communities are performed by municipalities, counties, and other governmental entities are by choice not delegated to local government in Houston. This has given rise to many quasi-governmental and private entities which carry out some of these functions in addition to private entities such as homeowner associations. Many of these are management districts or TIRZs, tiers. Later you will hear from John Breeding about their extensive authority to do streetscape beautification projects such as in the Uptown Galleria area. In our unzoned city, suffice it to say that the spread and extent of these districts has had a large impact on the appearance and attractiveness of the Houston area, and in some respects, I think could be said to be superior to zoning, where if you're in the wrong kind of a zone, anything happens, and these things really take care of everything. Scenic Houston has recently created a streetscape manual which suggests a number of criteria for streets, sidewalks, esplanades, metro stops, street fixtures and furniture, street trees, and other landscaping and related features. Consideration of these suggestions is currently underway by the City of Houston and a variety of public and private authorities for voluntary or mandated use. In conclusion, various publications such as Forbes and the Wall Street Journal have identified Houston as a top city for corporate relocations and business and population growth. This could not be happening today unless Houston had shed its reputation as an unattractive and unappealing city. It is not surprising that the scenic movement in Houston has enjoyed so much support, leadership, and effectiveness due to the strong participation and leadership of the business and development community, I think a point which I've been underscoring. We start out thinking these are just environmental issues, but in fact, the business and development community, in our experience, has been the key to the success and progress that we've made. Combined with the efforts of Houstonians of every stripe, Houston has been transformed over the last generation from a city lacking in attractiveness to a city whose appeal is apparent to the eye, as well as economic vitality. In Houston, we can say with conviction that scenic progress is not only something for all of us to enjoy, but also that scenic beauty is good for business. Thank you.